Right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Dave Rees. I'm the managing partner at Convergence. Great to have you with us this morning. I can see a lot of familiar names rolling in, which is really nice. For anyone who's not familiar with Convergence, can't miss the opportunity to give you a brief profile. So we describe ourselves as a specialist search firm. So a lot of the work we do is for executive roles. It doesn't fully encompass the part we play. So typically, we help companies to recruit leadership roles and specialist positions, usually where they know they're going to have a hard time accessing the caliber of talent they want through conventional ways like advertising. So they want to work with professional specialist recruiters, people who understand the role that they're trying to fill, and who literally, in many cases, are going to search the world to find it. So bottom line, if you are someone who hires carefully and you recognise that your own success is largely a function of the quality of the people you recruit, we'd always love to have a chat with you. But of course, the main focus today is our guest, Steve Naudé. Steve was formerly the Data and AI practice lead for Intergen. He was also the VP of Data and AI for LawView. He's now the AI transformation lead at Fonterra. He's also the chief AI officer at SmartSpace, which is an amazing tool that enables companies to connect all their data sources, link them to configured LLMs, so you can leverage GenAI capabilities across all your organizational data. It's also model agnostic, so super powerful. Delighted to have him with us. Right now, I think it's fair to say there's no topic that's hotter than AI. It seems to be the word on pretty much everyone's lips. But I know through conversations I've had with more people than I can count, a lot of us have got more questions than answers at this point, particularly around what the possibilities are, what the risks are, and how other organizations are actually deploying it. So on that basis, it's great to have an expert in the room. Just before I hand you over to Steve, we really want to make this session as useful as possible for all of you. And try and make sure you get what you're looking for from it. So the chat is open. If you've got any thoughts or questions along the way, please feel free just to put them in the chat as we go. I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I'll try and weave things into the conversation if possible, or we'll have a Q&A section at the end. So hopefully that's all good to go. I will hand you over to Steve, and really looking forward to your presentation, Steve.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. And thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone on the call. Yeah, just to add to my day-to-day, if I didn't have enough work, I also help companies understand GenAI for business. So I run a little niche sort of AI consulting advisory business as well, just to add to that. But let's get into it. Let's talk about generative AI for business today and see how your business can better leverage this new emerging technology. So AI hasn't just dawned upon us. AI has been around for quite some time. In fact, this is a slide I stole from Microsoft, and they say that AI has been around since 1956. The truth is that the term artificial intelligence has been around since 1956, but even a little bit before that, there was a guy by the name of Alan Turing who, generated the Turing test, which is designed to test the machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to that of a human. So since the 1950s, we've had this concept of artificial intelligence that's been around. Now, according to the slide, generative AI was been around since 2021, but I disagree with that, because if we do a little bit of research and we look at when GPT-1 was launched, that came out in June 2018. And even before that, a year before that, Google released this concept of a transformer, which underpins the whole generative AI technology. And that came out in 2017. So the question is, if GPT-1 was around since 2018, what's different? Why did AI only take off in November 2022 when ChatGPT was launched? And for me, the difference is usefulness. And I include accessibility in the definition of usefulness. So really, we've had this technology around for many, many years, but most of us have just not been able to access it or use it in a useful setting. But now what ChatGPT did that was different is they provided an interface for people to jump in, not have any sort of technical knowledge or background, and get value out of it. So why is AI different this time? Well, I spoke about the usefulness, I spoke about accessibility, but the technology is moving so fast that I didn't have a way of describing that was better than this video that I'm about to show you, which is the launch of Google Gemini 1.5 Pro about 2 months back. But within this product launch, there's a 2-minute demonstration that a lady does that I think is quite intriguing. So I'll play that for you now.
Here's a video of our prototype, which we'll see has 2 parts. Each part was captured in a single take in real time.
Okay, let's do some tests. Tell me when you see something that makes sound.
I see a speaker, which makes sound.
What is that part of the speaker called?
That is the tweeter. It produces high-frequency sounds.
Give me a creative alliteration about these.
Creative crayons color cheerfully. They certainly craft colorful creations.
What does that part of the code do?
This code defines encryption and decryption functions. It seems to use AES-CBC encryption to encode and decode data based on a key and an initialization vector, IV.
That's right. What neighborhood do you think I'm in?
This appears to be the King's Cross area of London. It is known for its railway station and transportation connections.
Do you remember where you saw my glasses?
Yes, I do. Your glasses were on the desk near a red apple.
What can I add here to make this system faster?
Adding a cache between the server and database could improve speed.
What does this remind you of?
Schrodinger's cat.
All right, give me a band name for this duo.
Golden Stripes.
Nice. Thanks, Gemini.
Fascinating to say the least. 2 things I want to point out there. Absolutely, for me, the best feature of all is finding where I left my glasses or keys or anything else for that matter. But just to explain that last part where she put the phone down and actually picked up the glasses, those are the Google Lens glasses, and she was using the glasses to provide vision to the AI models. And the glasses were the ones that was the device that was speaking to her from then on. And imagine, these glasses are actually available now. You can pick them up and hook them up and use them as your virtual assistant, so to speak. So truly astounding technology. And this is here now. In fact, I travel a lot. I'm based in Tauranga, and I often go up to Auckland to work with clients. And when I'm there, I usually stay at M Social. So I booked myself into a room, and this was on the wall inside my hotel room. And I thought, well, let me actually try this technology out. So I used my phone. I took this this photograph of the mural that they have on the wall, and I sent it to ChatGPT, and I said, what game is this? So it described, hey, it's rock, paper, scissors. It told me how the game actually works. So I said, cool, okay, let's play. So obviously there's supposed to be this element of surprise that you answer at the same time, but because AI at the moment is sort of a turn-by-turn application, it said, okay, I told it to go first. So it said it would be rock. So then I said, okay, well, I'll choose paper. And obviously I won. But this is still describing the technology that we saw in the video. It's here now. It's on my phone. I'm able to use it. The only limitation right now is the real-time video processing, which I believe they're holding back on purpose for 2 reasons. Number one, we've got the US elections on the go, and they don't want people interfering with that. In fact, that's why Sora hasn't been released as well. They've been pretty clear about that. And number two is just the immense amount of computational power that they're going to have to need to enable this for everyone. Imagine everyone just picking up their phone and just recording videos in real time and having all these AI models process and collaborate and respond. It's just going to take an immense amount of computational power. So it's coming, but this, without the video real-time processing, this is already here. But what is AI without data? AI without data is pretty useless, to be fair. But what I want to talk about next is this concept, or this difference between data and truth. Data does not equal truth. Data is used to train the models before they're released, and data is then used thereafter to provide organizational context. But data is unfortunately limited to the information that it can provide, and therefore data does not equal truth. So in 1977, two universities in Pennsylvania, I believe, they came up with a study that concluded that people are more likely to identify something as truthful if they've heard it before, regardless of whether it's actually truthful or not. Now, similarly, I believe that AI models are more likely to identify something as truthful if they've been trained on it or processed that data before. So what are models trained on, and what other data do they process? So we'll dive into those different types of data now quickly. In order to try and explain how models understand or deal with this concept of truth, I've devised a little truth experiment that we can go through. So picture you've got this flashlight where you're shining a light on a wall and you introduce a mystery object. Now, when that object is in the way of the flashlight, it produces a shadow, and the shadow in this case looks square to us. So I took that exact image and I threw it to ChatGPT and I said, well, what do you think this is? So it correctly responded that it's square shaped. It could be a box, a square plate, piece of paper. So then I thought, okay, well, let me change this object. I'll switch out the square and I'll put something else in the way. And this is the new shadow that was produced. Again, I asked ChatGPT, said, well, yep, it's triangular. It could be prism, three-dimensional object, triangular face, pyramid, those kind of things. And then lastly, I did the same, but now the shadow that's produced was circular. Again, it said, well, it's a circular shape. It's spherical, could be a ball. But then what I noticed is that ChatGPT started picking up on what I'm actually trying to describe here. And it said, well, it depends on the object and the angle, from which you view that object. So to illustrate what I've just described here, that's the object that we saw in all of those shadows. And if we look at it from that angle, we now get a circular shadow, because this is picture this as being a filled-in pipe that has a wedge shape on one end. But looking at it from this angle, we see a circular shadow. And then looking at it from this angle, we see a square, because we have a section of the pipe, so it's a square outline. And then looking at it from the top, because of the wedge, we get a triangular shadow. So all of those images were all the same object, in fact. But now, over and above providing enough data that represents the information that we want to process, context is even more important in some instances. So picture this scenario. We've got a wife who has designed her absolute favorite minimalist kitchen, and she's had this thing built, and she wants to, just sort of put the cherry on the top and hang her favorite saying on the wall: "You only live once, lick the bowl." It turns out, though, that her husband has a bit of a sense of humor. So doesn't he take it off the wall and put it somewhere else? And now suddenly the context of that sign, or her favorite saying, fundamentally changes. So not only do we have to worry about the data that we're using for AI, we also have to be aware of other context, metadata, other things like that. So let's look at the types of data that I described earlier. So on the one side, we have corpus data. Now, what is corpus data? Corpus data is data from the internet. It includes general knowledge, copyrighted information. It is used to train the models themselves. It is extended by fine tuning, so we can provide it more information that kind of leans it towards a particular area or knowledge base. It is limited by parameter counts and cutoff dates. So when they train these models, they make them of a certain size, and the data is a snapshot in time. But when we use these models, we have zero control over the trained and tuned data that is used to create those models. Then on the other side of the fence, we have what we call prompt data. So now this is used as contextual data that we add more context to any questions that we're trying to answer. It includes organizational data and confidential data from various businesses that you have access to and are authorized to use. It is extended by functions, agents, tools, GPTs. Now, all of those terms are quite technical, and I've got a slide towards the end that I'm hopefully going to break down what each of those things mean. It is limited by context windows, which is the size of the window that you can essentially fill up your prompt with. It includes the response, though, so it's important to remember that. Also limited by your ability to search and find the information that you need to enrich that prompt. But the good thing is we have 100% control over that at query time. So let's look at corpus data on the one side and think about some of the risks that may be associated with that. So we've established that training data is scraped from the internet up to a given point in time. It was an article that was released quite a few months back now that said that AI experts predict that by 2026, 90% of all online content will be generated by AI. But we use online content to train the new models. So that means that proportionally more AI-generated content will be used to train the next iteration of each AI model. There was another article that was released that said, well, ChatGPT is actually getting worse over time. So I have a theory basically saying that probably about 2028, we're going to have a bit of a problem in terms of relying solely on corpus data, because that's going to be mostly AI generated. Another risk is, well, let's say we decide now to train our own model, and I'll use the Bloomberg GPT as an example. So in March 2023, Bloomberg released a paper introducing their financial model that they claimed was superior to any other model in terms of understanding financial language and providing financial conversation, when reviewing papers. It was estimated that they invested $10 million to produce that model. It was never released, but that was kind of the calculations. It was only 6 months later that the GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 outperformed Bloomberg GPT. So they've invested all that time and money in building their own model, only to be superseded by what we call frontier models 6 months later. And all of that money had gone to waste. So the lesson here is, do you have the budget, the expertise, the compute to create your own model? And are you willing to be classified as a provider in the eyes of the EU Act? Probably not. So I would steer away from advising people to generate their own models unless they really know what they're doing. In terms of fine tuning, I stole this slide from Microsoft. I was invited to Microsoft HQ in Redmond at the end of last year on an AI First Movers tour. And this was one of the slides they used. It was taken with my phone, so forgive the quality of the slide. But essentially what Microsoft did was they took 140,000 Slack messages from a particular user, and they used that to fine-tune a model. So they have a frontier model. They then augmented its understanding with those 140,000 messages. And now they're busy testing it. So they said, okay, said to the model, write me a 500-word blog post on prompt engineering. And they said, sure, I'll work on that in the morning. They said, no, write it now. And said, okay, and it didn't do anything. What actually happened is the model started to take on human behavior based on the Slack messages that were used to fine-tune the model. This is an extreme but good example of, in the EU Act, EU AI Act, it talks about if you are fine-tuning a model that is regarded as a substantial modification to the outputs that those models provide. And this is a perfect example of doing that. By fine-tuning this model and changing the outputs away from those that were designed by the provider, you are then deemed the provider of such model. So again, when you're fine-tuning, just be very careful about what data you're providing those models, and how those outputs come. So we've established that there's mainly two types of data. There's corpus data and there's prompt data. But now, which do we use? So I asked ChatGPT, I said, well, which is more prevalent? Which is more prioritized? And in the context of business, which is obviously the topic of today, information that you provide in the prompt is more relevant to corpus data that the model was trained on. So it will generally supersede data that the model has on its own. So it's very important that we concentrate and focus on providing rich, accurate information within the prompt to these models when using them. Now, an analogy I like to use, we've all heard the term explained to me like I'm 5. Think of yourself as the first day of school and the teacher walks up to the chalkboard and they write 1 + 1 = 2, and then turn around to the class and go, what's 1 + 1? And everyone goes, 2. That's kind of like how you need to treat these models, in the sense that you need to provide them a question and then provide a snippet of text or information that contains the answer. So it's kind of like an open book test. And to further describe that, I'll do a little bit of an experiment here. So what happens when we don't provide any data? Now, a bit of background here, I have sleep apnea, and I use this as an example. And I said, right, ChatGPT, am I covered for sleep apnea by my health insurance provider? I gave it no further information. And it said, well, yes, you are, which is incorrect. Disclaimer though, I did prompt it to be overly positive and always in agreement. So obviously I'm going to expect a kind of answer like that. The point here is though, I did not give it any information and it gave me a response. So let's change that up a bit. Let's upload my Southern Cross Ultra Care policy that I have. And then again, I asked it, am I covered for sleep apnea? And it said, well, actually, no, according to the benefit summary, there's an exclusion for equipment such as CPAP machines. Now, this is interesting because I used the term sleep apnea and it on its own associated CPAP with sleep apnea. I didn't give it the term CPAP. And sleep apnea, I checked, is not mentioned anywhere in that document. But it accurate, because I provided contextual information related to my query, it now gave me an accurate answer. So let's dive into that a little further and try and understand what's happening behind the scenes. So here we have a snippet of the actual policy. And right at the end, it has this exclusion section. So I took this section here and I copied it out, asked the same question again, pasted the text in here, and it gave me exactly the same answer, saying, no, you're not covered. Now let's think about that even in more detail, as if we were a human trying to do the same process. And this is what's happening essentially behind the scenes. So we conceptualized and understood the question. The question is, am I covered for sleep apnea? We did a Google search for content. So I looked for some information related to my policy. I then accessed the content in the document and downloaded it to my device. I performed a keyword search for the content. So I looked for sleep apnea. Trouble is, it didn't find anything. So now mentally, I changed the term from sleep apnea to CPAP. Now suddenly, I find what I'm looking for. And in my search, I can highlight, the chunk of text that is relevant to answer my question. And then, I can construct a prompt containing the original query and the contextual chunk as evidence. And then essentially that is then sent to the AI model to reason over to provide the response. So all of those steps are essentially taking place autonomously. Now, another risk that we need to point out is that the experience, remember we spoke about experience. Why is, GPT-1 different from the launch of ChatGPT, and why is generative AI so prevalent now? And really it's that experience. But the risk is that if we don't create a good enough experience for the people in our organizations, we have the risk of losing them as users, so to speak. So our ability to search for and add contextual information to any user query that comes in directly relates to that experience that we're speaking about. There's also the risk of any third-party plugins that we use to go out and search for that extra information. So consider, let's say we are an organization and we align with all of these security accreditations. We've got SOC 2, we've got ISO 27001, we work in the health sector, so we're HIPAA compliant, and we align with GDPR. Now we introduce a new search capability that goes out and uses some third-party tool. We have to assess that third-party tool with every one of these accreditations each time we introduce something new, because that third-party tool could introduce any form of vulnerability that essentially is counterintuitive to any of these accreditations. So we need to just make sure that we check all this. Another risk is what I call woke responsible AI. So responsible AI is all about making sure that we use and these models are consumed responsibly. But now an example I'm going to use or show you today, what happens when you turn up the screws a little too tight? What happens when you try and put too many guardrails in place? And the example here is from Google. So Google released Gemini, and someone asked it to produce a picture of Elon Musk, and that was the picture that was produced. Someone else asked it to produce an image of a Viking, and those were the images that were produced. And then similarly, someone asked it to illustrate a 1943 German soldier, and those were the images that was produced. And in fact, they had policy against certain types of people within the AI models and the image generation. And Google actually released a statement in Feb this year saying, we apologize, we've got it wrong, we'll do better. And they had to release some of those policies against their models. That's how it started. Let's look at how it's going, because this is equally amusing. So Google announced a partnership with Reddit. And I don't know if any of you are Reddit users, but Reddit is probably the most sarcastic social media platform there is on the planet. And for every correct answer on Reddit, there's probably 20 incorrect or sarcastic answers or jokes or someone making fun of something. But for some reason, Google thought it was a great idea to use Reddit as a source of information to train some of their models. And here are some examples. Someone said, well, my cheese is not sticking to my pizza, so how do I fix that? And one of the suggestions was, well, you can use about an 1/8 of a cup of non-toxic glue, and that'll give it more tackiness. And to the right of that is the actual message that someone found where someone sarcastically said that was the answer to solving your cheese that's not sticky. And there was the press release about, Gemini advising to use glue on your pizza and also eat rocks. And here's the example of the rocks. Someone asked, how many rocks shall I eat? And it suggested 1 small rock per day, which is interesting to get the amount of minerals that we expect to get in our body. This is one of my favorite ones. So someone asked ChatGPT, the code that you sent me is throwing an error. Can you fix it? And it simply replied, well, it works on my machine, which is a famous IT saying, but hilarious. But again, be careful. There are some fake ones. People have actually, edited these pictures and released them to show that Gemini is creating these outputs, but these were confirmed as fake. So just be careful with what you see online. Another sort of thing that I need to bring up is regional law and policy. So there's a guy by the name of Oliver Patel that I follow on LinkedIn, and he releases these cheat sheets, which are tremendously helpful. And they speak about operating AI solutions within these various jurisdictions. And this is as an example where I learned about the fact that in China, AI models must be filed in China's algorithm registry. So as a provider like OpenAI, you're required to register your model with their algorithm registry. And then as a user, you're required to select a model from the algorithm registry. And if you don't do that, well, you're in breach of law. And that's probably not a country that I'd want to be in breach of law. So it's important to understand the nuances in each of the jurisdictions that you operate and that you are going to make AI solutions available to operate within. In the US, there's this issue of copyright. So the Copyright Office released a statement saying that human authorship is required for copyright protection, and that it will refuse to register work solely generated by AI. And that any material which is not the product of human authorship must be disclaimed on the registration application. So they are very strict about registering anything for copyright if it is generated by AI. They do go on to speak further about co-authorship. And yes, questions fire away. Dave will keep an eye on that. But yeah, so just be careful if you're using AI to generate any content. Maybe you're trying to, come up with a new product line and you use AI and it comes up with this great idea and you suddenly go to market with that. You, specifically if you operate within the US, you may not be able to register that content for copyright protection. And then another risk, this is obviously an extreme example. Most of us won't have this problem, but just be aware of the content that you're generating with AI use cases and the audience that are consuming them. There was an article released in January that said that 20% of the global ChatGPT users are actually kids, which is an alarming statistic. ChatGPT's use policy is that you have to be of a certain age. I'm not sure if it's 16 or 18, but you have to be of a certain age. And yeah, people below that are regularly using ChatGPT. So be careful of who's consuming your content and make sure that it is audience appropriate. So I thought we'd play a little game. This is what I referenced earlier about trying to understand some of these concepts of AI. And this is my 20 questions game. So what I'm going to do here is just try and illustrate all of the components that make up a generative AI solution. And we'll talk through how some of these work and what it looks like. So obviously we have a UX, and the easiest way to describe a GenAI UX is to refer to ChatGPT. Now it's important to note that ChatGPT is actually the UX side, and ChatGPT is not the model. The model, well, the LLM is the model, and that would be something like GPT-4 or GPT-4 Omni in this case, as an example. ChatGPT is the interface or the experience that we spoke about. It's not the model. So we have a query that comes from the UX, and that gets sent through to the model. That we refer to as the prompt. Now, these models don't work with language. They work with what we call tokens. So I'm just going to break away here to try and better describe how tokens work, what they are. So this is a tokenizer that's available online, and you can just put in about a bunch of text and it'll show you how the tokens are generated and how they're split up. So I wrote there, hello from a hidden layer, where text is converted into tokens. Tokens are a language agnostic representation of contextual meaning. So what it did was it color-coded each of the set of characters that make up the token. I say set of characters because it looks like it's word for word or punctuations, but some words do get broken up. So agnostic is an example of where it's broken up into 2 tokens. So in this case, we used 24 tokens, 20 words, 134 characters. And this is what the numerical representation of that piece of text looks like. This is what the model actually processes. Now remember, models are language agnostic, so to speak. So if we similarly used a Spanish example, and yes, I got ChatGPT to convert this to Spanish for me, I don't speak Spanish, you'll see that now suddenly it uses slightly more tokens and has slightly more words, and obviously more characters. And the numerical representation is different because it's retaining the language nuances of that piece of text. The LLM will understand both of these pieces of text in the same way and understand the meaning behind it. But it still retains the fact that it's Spanish, and it'll probably reply in Spanish. So now that we understand what this barrier is, this is the conversion between language to tokens. The LLM uses tokens, and then when it responds, it reverses that process to provide language back to us so that we can have a conversation. Now, within that prompt, we have a zero-shot type prompt. So in a zero-shot example, I would just ask it a straight-up question, and I would give it no examples, and I would submit that query. That's what we refer to as zero-shot. When we use few-shot, we say, hey, here are some examples, and if we use 20 questions, I'll actually show it to, for example, 2 complete games. I'll say, here's a game I played, here's 20 questions, and here's another game I played, here's further. It doesn't have to be 20, but here's a few questions, and here's the result, here's a few questions, here's the result. Then I'll say, let's play 20 questions on GenAI, go. Now, what it's doing is it's reviewing the examples I gave, and it'll better align the experience to suit those examples. We call that few-shot. We then have a completion, or otherwise known as a response. So we send it a prompt, and we get a response back, or completion. That's what it's called. Within that prompt, we have something called the system prompt. Now, again, this is still part of the prompt, but it's a specific set of instructions that we give the model in terms of, adopt a particular persona. I want you to be a marketing research analyst, and I want you to help me find out some information. You also give it instructions like, for example, only answer questions that you have relevant information and context to, or only answer questions where you can cite your sources. That's all defined within the system prompt. Now, within this whole area on the left, the prompt itself, whether we use zero-shot, few-shot, sorry, not the completion, the system prompt, we refer to that as prompt engineering. So everything here is what we are able to manipulate to create a better experience, and that is prompt engineering. Now, if we include the completion, now we're talking about the context window. So everything within that bigger dotted line square is what is consuming tokens, and that's how we are charged for the services. Obviously not ChatGPT, because that's a consumer product, but when we use AI models in business, we're charged by token consumption. And everything that sits within that square is, uses a token. So now we take it one step further, and now we create some sort of search capability. So we ask a question, and now before we send the prompt to the AI model, we go and do a little bit of a search, see if we can find any extra context, bring that back into the prompt, and then send that to the model. That is referred to as RAG, otherwise known as retrieval augmented generation. So it's really just the search capability of appending extra context to the prompt. And then RAG typically uses what we call a vector store, which is again, a numerical representation of a bunch of organizational data that we store and make searchable. This is an example of a tool. So while I referred to it as RAG earlier, it can be categorized as a tool. So these AI models, just see if I go a little step further. Yes, these AI models use what we call agents. Now, an agent is a little bit of a code that helps add autonomy to the process, and agents use what tools that we provide, and the tools could be, in this case, organizational search. It could be a web search. It could be, a call out to a mathematical program to do, formulas. It could be all sorts of things that we call those tools. And now my slide deck seems to have frozen. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the next example, and I'll start from the left here. So let's say we introduce a file upload feature to our UX. And in this case, we're just allowing for text documents to be uploaded. We then have that information come in at real time because the user's uploaded the document, and then it goes through to the agent, and the agent decides we need to store that somewhere to make it searchable. So we have what we call an embeddings model, which is It could also be used in this process, but essentially it's a model that is specifically designed to convert that information in the text document into that numerical representation that we store. And in this case, an in-memory vector store. So these are both vector stores. This one just happens to be pre-indexed and pre-generated, so ready for use. And this one we just generate at runtime because the user has uploaded a file and we haven't had the ability to generate, this information before the query has come in. And again, this is another example of a tool that is available to an agent to use. So now instead of us having a single agent and many tools, what if we introduce another agent to control that tool specifically? So a focused agent that looks after this in-memory vector store. And suddenly we have a multi-agent approach, or agentic workflows is what it's also called. So you typically have a main or conductor agent that handles where the query goes and how extra context is derived, and then it would hand over to another agent that would then do all the work associated with that, in this case, vector store. If we suddenly introduce more content types, so here we've got image, we've got audio, we've got video, and that all comes in through our file upload process. Now we've got multimodal support or multimodality. It just refers to the different media types that are supported. Here we've got an example of another agent that is referencing a small language model. So earlier I spoke about the Bloomberg GPT example. That is a pretty good example of a small language model that is specific to a particular use case. So in their case, they made a financial model, and that model's pretty much only good at financial things. It's, you can't ask it a medical question because it probably won't know. And these models are typically much smaller than your general frontier models from the likes of OpenAI, but they are experts in their field. So if we're talking financial, in this case, we'd be good to use Bloomberg GPT, for example. And then this is a very new term, new as in months, but fairly new in the world of generative AI. And let's say we have an agent handing over to another agent, and we have an input process of that query that's coming in. We then introduce what's called the gating network. And the gating network's job is to hand over to a number of experts. So these are now different models. So we might have, I don't know, let's think of a medical example. We might have a radiographer here, we might have an anesthetist here, and we might have a surgeon here. So we're asking models that are representative of those specific fields a medical question, and these three models are going to produce three different outputs. But now what the gating network does is it decides which way or how to weight the answers that come out of those models. So in the example I've put here, it says, well, whatever comes from this model in this question, the specific question, we should weight this answer at 55%, this one at 15, and this one at 30. And essentially, it'll combine the information with that weighting. And this process combined is what we refer to as a mixture of experts approach. We don't have to build that. We don't do that. That is done by the providers. But this is what a mixture of experts process looks like under the hood. And then it produces an output, which is now weighted through the gated network, and that is provided back to the agent.
Steve, just so we're clear on this, so is this the way that these AI models currently work, or you're saying this is a sort of a future's potential setup and output?
Yeah, I'd probably draw a line here under 17, to be fair. So everything, 17 and up is pretty standard. Everyone's doing it that way. From 18 and 19, and even 20 is another thing I'm going to show. This is where we're going. This is where it's available now. We can use it, but it's not generally adopted yet.
And not to preempt too much, but from a setup like this, what can we as a user expect in terms of the quality of the outputs or sort of functionality?
Obviously, everything here, as you go on down this list, is designed to create a better output, a more accurate output. That's why we're introducing all of this technology. But in terms of usability, this is very high level. So most of this would be abstracted away from any user, definitely, and even from any technical employee. A lot of this is done behind the scenes. When we're talking the developers, the engineers, yes, they will be deep in the weeds of this kind of stuff.
Cool. And we've got a few questions coming in. I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 15 minutes left. So do you want to tackle a few of these questions?
Perfect. Are any of them related to use cases? Because my next slide's all about use cases.
Oh, go for it.
Cool. Lastly, just to finish off here, there is an example of actions. So we're moving to action-based requests. So I can jump into, well, hopefully in the future, I'll jump into ChatGPT and say, hey, find me a meeting in Dave's calendar for, next Thursday. Now, what it'll do is understand the contextual awareness of next Thursday. It'll also then have access to Dave's calendar, which might be publicly available through Calendly, and then it will find a gap, and then action and actually create a meeting entry for us automatically. So that's the actions that are coming in, and it essentially just uses an API under the hood to enforce that action. So let's have a look at some use cases quickly before we jump into questions. So the very first thing that I advise companies to do is to create some form of safe ChatGPT. You don't want your organizational data leaving your organization. So have a form of, whether it's ChatGPT Enterprise, whether it's some other proprietary software, whether it's, something you've used, through GitHub, which essentially consumes, Azure resources as an example, have some form of safe ChatGPT for your employees to go in and converse and reason over your organizational data. If you don't do that, people are going to use ChatGPT online and they're going to send your organizational data into ChatGPT, which, as per their terms and conditions, if you're using the free version, they can use to train future iterations of their model. So don't do that. Make something available for your users to use. Personalized marketing. I love this example. So let's say that I'm a generative AI consultant and I'd like to provide services to Convergence, and I know what their website is, so I provide that, and I say, hey, draft me, a targeted cold call email that I can reach out to these guys. And what it's done here in this example is gone to the website and it's identified their preferred ways of working, listing, belonging, insight, method. These are words that are available on the website. And now it's created a targeted approach that I can then use to reach out and offer my services. But then I took it one step further and I said, well, actually I'm lazy. I don't know who to even reach out to, because it just said partners contact. So I said, well, go and look, who should I address this to? Look up the managing partner, and said, oh, okay, yeah, it's Dave. Oh, okay. So, and then it produced another output, which I don't have on the screen, where it changed that Convergence partner's contact to Dave, and it actually drafted the entire communication for me. Another one here is customer service. So, as you're talking, we've all experienced this. We phone in, we ask for help. Here I could be transcribing the actual audio text. And then another use case is, at the bottom here, you'll see typical, we get handed off to somebody else and we have to explain our story all over again. It's so damn frustrating. But now using AI, we've got the transcription of the original, conversation that happened with the first person I spoke to, and the engineer can read that before jumping on the call with me and going, actually, I know what your problem is. Let me see how I can help you. So customer service is a great use case. Another one is just legal review. This is a product called RVO.ai. I'm not associated with them. I'm actually reviewing it on behalf of a client. But essentially, it can provide redlining for your contracts. You can actually provide clauses or ideas in terms of how you deal with indemnity, limitation of liability, governing law, all those kind of things. And then further, it can even explain what the contract means in non-legal terms. So it can translate it into normal English for you as well. Great use case. And there's many of these examples. So before we jump into questions, I'll end with, have you started your GenAI journey? I implore you, if you have not, to just, jump on the free version of ChatGPT, figure out how these things work, build some sort of a user group within your organization to make sure that people are aware and aligned with how this technology works. Fail fast. It is so important to try and fail and try and fail. Fail fast is part of the learning process. It is not a failure. You have to do these iterative approaches and figure out what you can and can't do with GenAI. Be curious. Try it. See if it works. If it doesn't, try something else. This is how we as practitioners get to learn this technology. None of us are experts. We're all learning this as we go along. And then lastly, just find the right partner. You got to have someone who has a little bit of experience in this space, and absolutely align with someone who can help you fail faster and be more curious. And with that, let's jump into questions.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Steve. Super useful just to get an understanding of some of the constructs that sit behind this. I think it's pretty much invisible to most of us if you're not technical, and the risks that emerge from it is really, really useful. There's a few questions here just on the topic of use cases. A couple of people keen to get an understanding of use cases in industrial or manufacturing businesses. We mentioned earlier you're leading the AI transformation for Fonterra.
Yep.
To the extent that you're able to share some of the use cases there, it'd be really helpful to understand what you're seeing or what the journey looks like.
I'd say one of the most popular use cases there is we are building this product. I won't mention its name because we're busy going through an IP/patent review. But essentially, it's an advanced search. What it allows us to do is researchers to jump in, research a particular topic, and then wade through up to 100 years of documentation to find anything relevant to that question on that topic. And it could be things like protein synthesis. It could be, molecular-based questions, scientific papers. And this advanced search will go out and review all of the content, thousands and thousands of documents, and sort of handpick, for want of a better word, pieces of information that are relevant to that query. And research that potentially takes days, sometimes weeks, reviewing all of that content can now be done in hours. So productivity is a major use case in general for GenAI.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sort of like a meta-analysis across thousands and thousands of documents.
Totally. And remember, these models have been trained on pretty much everything on the internet. So now you've got a PhD in every subject you can ever imagine in your pocket, on your phone, or in your business, through an enterprise-hosted GenAI model. All you have to do is just link it up to your organizational data, and it understands and has these concepts through all of the learnings online that's been made available to train these models.
So we've got 3 frontier models, ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. Then you've got Copilot and a bunch of others out there. How should we think about, the right tool for the job? Does it matter which one you use, or one sort of, in one direction? How do you sort of utilize the different tool set?
It's a bit of an arms race, to be fair. Claude, I'd say ChatGPT, with their release of Omni 1 preview, which just came out a few days ago, which deals with heavily complex queries and actually does a planning exercise before it tries to solve your problem, is one step ahead of everyone else right now. But if you'd asked me a week ago, I'd say Claude was ahead of the game, because they have their reasoning is slightly better, and they're better at writing code, I believe. It's very difficult. It depends on the context. It depends on what you're trying to apply these models to do. For example, if you're trying to write, use it for software development and write code, I would just jump straight to something like GitHub Studio, because now we're talking about the experience. GitHub Studio has plugins to Visual Studio. I don't have to copy and paste. This thing can work alongside me in my favorite applications, meet me where I'm at, and assist me along the way while I'm still doing my normal work. I don't have to do anything extra to consume that model. But if you had to use ChatGPT or Claude, you'd have to copy, paste, further explain what you're trying to do. It's just annoying. So absolutely use the right tool for the job, and it depends on your application.
The impact in the workplace, there's been a lot of talk about that, and the varying different opinions on the extent to which jobs are going to disappear altogether or be disrupted. What's your view on the extent to which we're going to see sort of disruption, and which jobs in particular are most likely to be impacted?
Disruption, 100%. It's coming. Absolutely. It's probably here already, to be fair. Jobs that are going to be impacted the most are jobs that I think are repetitive in nature, and jobs that are easily replaced by automated processes. So an example would be a call center agent. As soon as, well, it's actually already available, but when voice is linked to an AI model, you are pretty soon not going to be able to know the difference between whether you're speaking with a human or speaking with an AI model. And the AI model can also then be further enhanced by having accessibility to all of your previous information that, engagements that you've had with that company. So it can be all of your calls, all of your accounts information, all of your transactions within that company is now available to this AI model. And you can have a conversation in a conversational setting, which you saw in my Google Gemini example, that sounds like you're talking to a human, but has all this rich information, and you wouldn't even know the difference. Companies that don't leverage GenAI will be those that are affected first and the most, I believe. There are, organizations that are using this to sort of leapfrog ahead of the competition. And I must iterate that buying a Copilot license is not leapfrogging ahead of the competition, because the competition could do the same. It's actually how you use this technology, not what you have. So, yep. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, interesting. There's kind of a first mover advantage at this stage, but I guess you get to a point where everybody becomes savvy users of this, and there's be some nuance in the differences. But to your point earlier about the sort of tailored marketing, that everybody seems to be taking much the same approach, and so from a competitive advantage point of view, you kind of reach this kind of game theoretical Nash equilibrium point where everybody's doing the same thing and no advantage can be gained. So is that the way it's likely to be played out, or is there different views on that?
Well, remember the differentiator here is your organizational data. You're the only one that has access to that. So how rich is that information, and how well constructed and what governance practices do you have over that information? That's really, we've heard the saying for years, data is the new oil, but now it's becoming increasingly apparent, because that is my differentiator across, compared to any other company out there. The technologies everyone has access to, the expertise hopefully everyone has access to, is really down to the data that's going to change the experience. So that's where we should focus.
Another question here from Henry. This is a great presentation. I've been using ChatGPT-4 to help me with calculations to design the size, movements, and equipment requirements for a new warehouse. It's been amazing with the calculations. What are the risks with doing this, in your view?
Obviously, risks are hallucinations. Everything that comes out of an AI model needs to be validated and checked. I'll use the example. My daughter is busy doing extra maths through a company called Numberworks at the moment, and they provide these little sort of queries where you have to do a little calculation, and next to the answer there's one of two options, and the number represents a letter, and essentially it builds out a phrase. So it's kind of like trying to play sort of I think Wheel of Fortune was the game where you had to sort of get this phrase out. And she really enjoyed that, and she said, hey Dad, can you make me some more? I really want to do these. And she didn't have any more. So I jumped onto ChatGPT and said, well, I took a photo of it. I said, well, here's the base. This is what I'm trying to do. Make me some more. And it made some more, but it came out absolute gibberish. Like the phrases didn't make sense. Some of the numbers didn't have the correct answers available. So you really got to check the output of these models. One thing that I enforce is citations. If a model cannot provide the source of where it got that data from, I don't consider it a result. And if that source cannot be checked and verified against its output, don't use it.
Perhaps last question. Any thoughts on the negative impacts? I mean, we talked a little bit about job disruptions, job losses. Deborah mentions UBI as an example of potential solutions, but how about other societal or psychosocial impacts down the line? I said maybe a little bit outside your core expertise, but I
mean, I can comment on that. Negative impacts, the one that's really apparent for me is energy consumption. Like, you know, people were complaining about when crypto first came out, how much energy Bitcoin is using, but that's literally just a minute bit compared to what AI is consuming. AI is fundamentally consuming vast amounts of energy. And the more features that they enable, for example, in ChatGPT, the more computational power they need to have. And this is why NVIDIA is doing so well in the stock market, is because they're selling chips to everyone, which all consumes power and water. So that's definitely a negative for me. People need to make more efficient chips, hopefully, in the near future that won't have this environmental impact. On the job side, yes, immediately jobs will be impacted. But as we saw with the age of the internet and other technologies, new jobs will start to come about. So we'll just sort of shift away from doing the repetitive, the mundane, the administrative work that AI can do for us and do more creative work. So we'll just find new things to do. There will be new jobs that'll come about. So I don't think that's necessarily a negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the energy point, I was listening to the presentation Eric Schmidt gave to Stanford a few weeks ago, and it's saying literally we don't have enough energy. The country doesn't produce enough energy to get where we need to get to.
Totally.
You know, we need to. Yeah, his suggestion was that we become a little bit more pally with Canada as a friendly nation, neighbouring nation, because otherwise there's just no way to do it. I've seen other they're suggesting building a nuclear power plant next to some of these data centres just as a fuel source.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, look, that's been awesome, Steve. Really appreciate your input and expertise. Hopefully, I'm sure everyone's taken away a lot from that. So yeah, all that remains is to thank you and to thank everybody for coming along. Thanks for attending. We'll be sending the recording out, perhaps the slide deck with it too. So we'll get that over to you guys. If not before the end of the week, then perhaps early part of next week. But yeah, thanks again, and hope you all have enjoyable days.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. See you. Bye.